Welcome to Push Go, a podcast powered by Plum, where we highlight the defining moments that impact how we live and work. Today, I'm joined by tech entrepreneur Kristi Zuhlke. Kristi launched her career working with billion-dollar brands at Procter Gamble, but she chose to leave the stability of P&G to follow her passion for tech, innovation, and startups. Since then, she's launched 2 tech companies, and she's now working on her third. Now, today, Kristi shares the moment she decided she didn't want to look back at her life and think, I wish I would have tried that. Kristi, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Rick. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, I was looking forward to this. So, calling from Chicago, right?
Yes, snowy Chicago. It is snowing today.
Okay. Well, it's a little bit of snow here as well. Have you always been a Chicago native?
No, so I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin.
Okay.
And then I moved to Cincinnati for school, and then was in Cincinnati for a number of years. Then moved to Boston, then moved to Chicago, then California, like a short stint. I've been kind of all over the place for a little while.
Wow. So how did you end up in school in Cincinnati?
So I went to Xavier University,
Yeah.
which is like the small private school. And I went there for a number of reasons.
The campus.
One of the reasons
Love the cobblestone, love the ivy. Fantastic
that is
campus.
very true. It's a lovely campus. It was not in Wisconsin. It was further south.
Okay.
I wanted to get warmer. And yet I live in Chicago now. And then also they had a major in entrepreneurship. And this is a long time ago. This is 2001. And so that was pretty rare for that time.
Yeah.
But that was actually one of the requirements that I looked at for schools.
Wow. So did you always know that you wanted to get into the world of entrepreneurship? And that's kind of why the college really attracted you?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Which my husband likes to tease me. He's like, wait, you got a degree in entrepreneurship. Isn't that kind of weird? Like, why does that not seem to match? I'm like, whatever, man. Okay. Yeah, I always, I had a double major in all fairness. I had marketing and
Sure.
entrepreneurship. So I think the more known thing to me was marketing at the time. And I was really interested in growing brands but I always have been an idea person. I started a journal when I was in high school that I still have to this day, and I still continue to journal in of all my different business ideas. And so I think I just have a little bit of that DNA, entrepreneurial DNA, which comes from my father who grew up on a dairy farm. That's probably one of the most entrepreneurial things you can do.
Yeah.
And then my grandfather on my mom's side, he started his own building company after World War II. So I think I just have a bit of that in my DNA. And so that's just how my brain works.
So you've seen that, you've got that family influence, because so many entrepreneurs, when you talk to them, in some cases, I'd argue like a 50-50 split. Some of them grew up in it, and others are like, I just knew I wanted to do this, but I had no kind of peer or person that would really kind of encourage me to go down that path. So when you look at your grandparents and your dad, are they encouraging you to stay and work on the farm, or are they saying, no, this was for us, we want you to get an education?
Yeah, it was more so like, so my dad grew up on the farm, and then his parents were like that. They're like, do not be farmers. It's a really tough life.
Yeah.
Like go do something different. And so he was in the utility industry. And so I wouldn't say my parents necessarily encouraged me to go be an entrepreneur. But I think it's just more so, it was something that really clicked with me. It was something that got me excited. And ideas just always sparked energy for me. And so I tried to follow that passion. I think they've always been very supportive of their children following their passions. And that was more of the focus than, hey, entrepreneurship or marketing or, whatever route it was.
Yeah. But you did end up in the world of marketing at a pretty large company. So you're at Xavier, you're doing the entrepreneurial marketing thing. By the time you're a junior or so, did you have an idea you wanted to go into corporate America, or were you still kind of debating what you wanted to do post university?
Yeah, so I was very much debating. Actually, so I started my first business when I was in college. So
Okay.
I started the first student run and owned business at Xavier University. And because of that, I served on the board of entrepreneurship at Xavier,
Oh,
representing the student body. And a woman who served on that board, her name was Kristen Sharp, and she was a insights director, associate director at the time in FemCare at P&G. And she was like, Kristi, what are you gonna do when you graduate? And I was like, I'm gonna start another company. She's like, oh, okay. What are you gonna start? I was like, I don't know yet, but I'm gonna start. I'm gonna start one. Sure. She's like, okay. She's like, why don't you come and learn how to build billion-dollar brands? And when you make a mistake, it doesn't hit your bank account. And learn how a large company operates, and
okay.
then go start a business.
That's a pretty good
And I was like,
recruiting pitch.
yeah,
Yeah.
and to go work for her, I like have a lot of admiration for her. So, I was like, okay, I didn't really know what insights was. Like, I didn't know what market research
Right.
was, so, but to work for her, work for P&G sounded like a good idea. And so I did that. I went and I worked for her. And then moved up within the company and really enjoyed my time there. I was there for 6 years,
Where
but
did
I
you
was
start
there
out? What area did you start out in, brand or in research? Were you in CMK
in
type of?
research.
Okay.
CMK, yep, consumer market knowledge, which is a fancy word for insights. They now call it insights and
Yeah.
analytics. Uh, and so it's, that complement to the marketing person, that complement to the brand person, really driving consumer-based decisions inside the organization. And I started on the Always brand in FemCare. And then after P&G bought Gillette, I had the opportunity to go work and move to Boston and
Oh,
work on
wow.
Gillette,
Okay. That's like
and
an
work out.
entrepreneurial thing.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Starting in starting a position in a company where there are two very different cultures. So
Mhm.
P&G had one culture, Gillette had another culture, and they were completely opposite. And
Mm.
so it was very entrepreneurial to be thrown into that. And then also at the time, Gillette had really focused their business on growth in the developed world. And I was tasked with growing the business and the emerging markets. And so
Okay.
that's another entrepreneurial aspect, which was, hey, we need to not just take the 5 blade fusion razor that works for the average man in America who makes 60K a year. We need to make a razor that fits the man in India who's making $1,000 US dollars a year. And so
Mhm.
that was so fun. That was like my favorite assignment at P&G, was figuring out how to innovate for the emerging markets on Gillette.
And that was still on the insight side. You were still
Yep.
understanding the consumer, really bringing that back to the product development group, to the brand group, saying, here's the insights I have and how we're going to drive
Right.
that. So
Agree.
you're living the dream. You're, 5, 6 years in. You have to have people telling you, Kristi, you've got a pretty good career going here. I can't wait for you to see the next assignment, then the next assignment.
Yes.
So what are people telling you internally at P&G and your friends about your career trajectory at that time?
Well, this was 2011.
Okay.
So still at this time, most people stayed at P&G for 30 years. And even in their careers, I feel like it really wasn't right about that time is when people started to think about more like 2-year, 3-year stints at companies versus staying the long haul. So it was still very much like, Kristi, you're here for the next 30 years.
Right.
And most people go to P&G thinking that back then.
Yeah. Well, I was a
I don't
17-year person as an example. I say there's 17 years and then post that
Yeah,
decided to leave. Yeah, I get it.
yeah, yeah. And it was so fun. I
Mhm.
worked with wonderful people. Of course, you want to stay there for 30 years. But what happened to me was I knew I was there for a purpose. I knew going in that I was there to be a sponge, and I was there to be a sponge to learn how to start my own business. So I knew that my shares vested at 5 years. I was fully vested at 5 years. And so I was like, all right, that was kind of my milestone. Made it through that, went another year, and I started to have this feeling that I was very uncomfortable with, which I now realize was envy.
Oh,
I
wow. That's an
rarely
interesting word. Envy.
envy. And what would happen is I started to get involved a little bit in the entrepreneurial community in Boston, and I would go to a startup event and I would watch these entrepreneurs on panels talk, and I would feel envious.
Kind of a gut thing.
Yeah.
Oh,
Like and
wow.
I rarely I'm this type of person who I can be happy for everyone in their success. Like I rarely am jealous, I am rarely envious of others, but it was so uncomfortable for me. And so
Could you
I
put
think it
your
was
finger on it at that time? Did you know what that was, or you just knew you had a feeling?
no, well, probably it took a month of processing,
Okay.
but it was pretty immediate within that time that I was like, this feels so uncomfortable that I need to do something about this.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you start
Yeah.
processing it. So who are you processing this with? You're, again, corporate career, outside people, your parents are looking at you. Are you married at that time?
No, I'm single at that time.
Okay.
So I have like no, no strings attached, pretty high, like I can take a risk. And so I was definitely talking to my parents. I was talking to friends. I would say I was talking to less internal P&G people, not
Sure.
because for any other particular reason, but just, talking to mentors and friends outside of P&G, because I probably knew what the internal P&G folks were going to tell me. But
Are you crazy?
um, yeah, yeah, or I have a really good friend who worked at P&G, and I call her one day, and I was like, if I have to wordsmith the attribute that we're going to test and the brand equity score one more time, or in the brand equity say one more time, I'm going to lose my mind.
Oh, wow.
And she's like, Kristi, I think your skill set is different than
Mhm.
it's you've it's expanding, and so you're feeling that tension because it's giving you a signal. And so she really helped. I mean, a lot of people external to P&G helped me realize that, if I was going to take a risk, it was a really good time in my life to take a risk. I didn't have children, I didn't have a husband. I could, if I was poor, it didn't matter, it was just me. I could figure out how to eat ramen and live in a studio apartment in Chicago. It was like no problem.
You
So
can figure it out.
so yeah, it was a good time. It was a good time for me to start a business.
So at that time, did you have your portfolio of 3 to 5 business ideas, or had you kind of honed it down to the one you knew you wanted to go, execute at that
Yeah,
time?
I had one that I was really passionate about. I had this concept of someone close to me had survived melanoma. They had stage 2B melanoma, skin cancer. And they would ask me, like, hey, did this mole change? Or, like, does this one look asymmetrical? I'm like, why are you asking me these
Yeah.
questions? And if you go to a dermatologist, they'll say, there are five characters of potentially melanoma uh, spots on your body. And so you should track these, and they give you a piece of paper to track them at
Hmm.
home. And I'm like, this is insane. A smartphone can do this for you. And so
Yeah.
this is 2011. Smartphones are pretty new still. They're about 4 years on the
Yeah.
market. Apps are a really big thing. They're starting to figure out what an app is, all that. So I had this vision of creating a smartphone app that would track the characteristics of melanoma, so that you could go then to a dermatologist and say, hey, look, here's this spot on me. I think it's starting to show some interesting characteristics. Here's the data. Here's what's been happening. And then they can do like a full body assessment for you. And so that's what I became really passionate about, and what I ended up founding and launching and then selling about a year after I left P&G.
Okay, so let's talk about that kind of that defining moment of leaving P&G, because when we talked about that, you said you had a lunch with your dad, and it was that, hey,
Yeah.
you're getting ready to make the move. You knew you need some encouragement there. So kind of walk us through, you've got the idea, you knew you wanted to launch it. You're still at P&G, but you're getting ready to make the move. Tell us about that lunch with your dad.
So I think it was, I think he's been such a great mentor in my life, and he does a good job of not telling me what to do, but he really helped me walk through the pros and cons. And a lot of it came down to like what amount of risk I was willing to take, and it helped drive clarity for me that it was one of those things that I would regret not doing in my life if I didn't try. And it was the comfort in him saying, like, you can always go back to corporate America.
Yeah.
There's always going to be a job in corporate America for you. Yeah, you might have to start at the bottom again, but you don't have to sit around and go, well, I wish I would have tried. And so that's really where I got comfort in helping like make that jump out of P&G and into this kind of unknown tech space, which I had no background in.
Right. So it sounds like he has always been an encourager for you.
Absolutely. And my mom too. I don't mean to exclude
Sure.
her from the story, but he's got that very entrepreneurial mind. And I shouldn't leave my mom out. She actually started a tech company during the tech boom.
Of course
He
she
and
did.
my mom did. So, it didn't end up working out, but I think my dad is very risk adverse. And then also he and I are cut from the same cloth in that we think very entrepreneurial.
All right. So you're having this lunch. He's encouraging you. So at that point in time, because we talk about defining moments, you knew then it was time to go try. And you just told us, hey, you went out, hit the company, knocked it out of the park, started, exited. But what are you going to do now? I mean, talking about defining moments, you're finished. You exited the company. So now
Yes.
what's up? What's Kristi going to do now?
Yeah, well, I think I learned a lot about myself, about entrepreneurship, about technology, and through the whole process. And since it was such a short time period, it was kind of came at me really fast.
Okay.
So I went back to my journal of business ideas that I had, and I knew I wanted to start another business. I knew that. I was not contemplating, do I go get a normal job? I knew I could survive the turmoil that it takes to be able to absorb when you're going through entrepreneurship. So
keep that thought. I want to slow down on two things. Okay, number one,
Sure.
You went back to your journal. That's so cool. So we cannot lose that fact that over the years there's this journal where you've kept thoughts. Because I face this. I'll have an idea and I forget about it, or something came out. So love the journal aspect of that. But it sounds like you also knew going back to corporate America was the no. No, not ever, but it was a no. You weren't going back and forth. You knew you were going to stay this path.
Right. Yes. Yep. There wasn't a doubt that I was going to stay this path. I think I'd gotten a taste for it. I had seen a little bit of success, and I was like, all right, I want to go after my next idea.
Okay.
Yes.
So now you get this journal of 10, 50, 100, 1,000 ideas. And you're leafing through the journal one night, saying, I wonder what great idea I'm going to launch next. So how does that play out?
Well, I think a couple of things that I learned about myself was that one is that I was very lonely being a solo founder of my first company. So I knew I wanted to have a co-founder. I also learned that it was really hard to start a company where I wasn't from the industry. I wasn't from healthcare. I wasn't from tech. And so it's like, I probably should pick something where I've had at least some kind of overlap in that industry space. And so as I leafed through the business ideas, that was a bit of the lens that I was going through, building off of my knowledge that I had built or my experience that I had built from this prior company. So I'm looking through it, and this idea that just popped up, which was very, it hit on all cylinders, was this idea from when I was at P&G, which was I would be in meetings and people would want to know answers from data. They'd be like, Kristi, what % of men shave in the shower? And I'm like, I'm sure we know that. I mean, we spend millions of dollars in research every year. And so I had this idea of the Google for market research data. So be inside of a company. And so that's where I was like, okay, this matches well, where I knew I wanted a co-founder, so I need to go find a tech co-founder. And then, but it matched my background so well that I thought I had a right to win there. And so that's why I settled on what then became Knowledge Hound.
Well, I love that. We're going to focus on Knowledge Hound here in a second, but I love the kind of that introspective look as to I was lonely
Mm-hmm.
And again, as an entrepreneur, I get this. I've always had co-founders, but I've talked to other people and they've gone down that same path saying it's a lonely road at night when you're trying to process, and people, if they're not living it with you, they're like, and 2 minutes later they've changed subjects. You're like, wait a minute. I mean, I need an hour of your time to process what just happened to me. And they're like, Kristi, we're fine. Hey, what do you go out to dinner? You're like, yeah. So I love the lonely. And then really methodically looking at it saying, if I had a co-founder,
Mm-hmm.
what attributes am I looking for? So
Mm-hmm.
the tech versus the business side, I love that aspect as well. So how did you find the co-founder? Because it wasn't like you do 1-800-co-founder or just Google something. So it's an
Yeah.
important decision because it's like a marriage. So how did you
Yep.
find a co-founder?
Well, so when I started networking in Chicago, I had moved myself from during my first company, I had moved myself from Boston to Chicago to be closer to family. And so I was in Chicago then, and I started going to networking events for the startup community in Chicago. And I just knew I needed to find at least a developer that could get me going. And I was at one of the many networking events I had gone to that year, and met a guy, Andrew, and I was like, what brings you here? He's like, well, I'm a developer currently at this company. And he's like, I kind of really would like to get in the startup world. I was like, well, I got an idea. And he's like, okay, what do you got? So we met for coffee, and over a period of several months, we kind of started to build this idea out. And then one day he quit his job and we became co-founders.
So when did you know that he was the right person to begin truly to have a partnership? I mean, obviously it was more than just a couple of conversations, but when did it
Mhm.
click that both of you said, yeah, equally or whatever the ratio is, we're going to do this together as partners?
Yeah, I think it was once we started. So I think there's like the business side of it is when is it right to bring on a co-founder? And then there's the when is this the right co-founder? And so
Okay.
from the business side of things, we started, I was able to sell uh, two, no, three Fortune 500 companies on the concept of it, on
Okay.
a prototype that looked like it worked. And then we were like, okay, we have something here. Uh-huh. And so that's when we knew, okay, it's time we need to go full time dev versus the evenings and the
Right.
mornings, so that's one side of it. And then is this the right person? Is that it's really about the skill set. And I think what's hard is that with startups, they evolve so quickly that it's extremely hard to know, will that skill set continue to evolve with the company for either myself or the co-founder.
Mhm.
And so it's difficult. There are a lot of difficult conversations that have to be had up front, and very transparent conversations as to, like, one of us may not work out. So how do we handle that with legal documents and vesting schedules and our equity share, to make sure that we understand that, yeah, one of us may not be here in a year or two or three. I think too, though, there is two meanings to co-founder. Co-founder, the title really means that you were there since the beginning. And some people assume that if you have the title co-founder, that means that, oh, you were 50-50 equity
Right.
split
That's fair.
or 50-50 decision making. And so that's something that I've mentored a lot of founders on, is just because you bring on a co-founder, that does not mean that you lose control of your company. It doesn't have to mean that. Now, you
Right.
may want to have 50-50 decision making with that other person. In my case, I didn't. I knew that, like, the majority of decisions needed to come from me. I knew the strategy of the business. I thought I would be along for much longer part of the ride. And so I structured the agreement in that way.
I often tell people, and a good business attorney has a very good prenup before you get started.
Yes, absolutely. Totally. And it's sad to I hate having to think that way. I'm like this
Uh,
optimist, and I love people. I love people. Like, before I meet you, I love you. And then you have to like really burn me bad
Okay,
for me to
good.
dislike you, you know? And so it's really hard for me to think that way, but I think through experience and some hardships of business relationships, I've been burned and I've realized that it is really important to have a prenup, to have an agreement,
Yeah.
because there are so many different twists and turns that companies can take, and you just cannot predict the future.
Yeah. Now, Knowledge Hound, that's when I first started, I first met you, was in your early
Yeah.
stages of Knowledge Hound.
Yeah.
And it took off like crazy, tremendous success. You raised some money, everything's kind of clicking along. And then all of a sudden, this thing starts to grow.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you became like, there's a startup and then there's like a growing company. And you left startup phase pretty quick. At what point in time did you realize that you've got more of a company to run versus a classic startup? Well, when did you hit that phase? You're like, wow, I need someone to run this.
Yeah, I think it was really when we were at about 1 million in revenue, that it in about 10 employees, that I was like, oh, this is
Yeah.
this isn't my fun little project anymore. I'm really responsible for people's livelihoods. We started offering benefits, like paying people's health insurance. Like,
Imagine
what?
that.
I can do that. I can provide that. That's amazing. Oh, this is a big deal. So I think that's kind of that was, the realization for me was, oh man, like that at that 1 million in revenue milestone was when, yeah, things started to really hit home.
So Kristi, as you begin to grow a Knowledge Hound, you're no longer like a 1-year startup, 2-year. You're bringing in investors. You've talked about having, a co-founder, but it's more than just you. You've got a board. You've got people that are now influencing you, and you've got Fortune 500 companies depending upon you for their business now. So at what point in time did you realize this is kind of a bigger company versus a startup? When did you realize it was no longer kind of a startup? This really is kind of a entity that I'm running now, and it's kind of bigger than me.
Yeah, I think having a board is certainly a wake-up call. I never managed a board of directors before, and oh my gosh, someday I'm going to write a book. I actually won't write a book because I'm not a very good writer, but maybe some short blogs or something about how I totally effed up running a board of directors. It was such a new skill set, and managing investors. So many lessons learned there. But I think that made it feel extremely real.
Okay.
Because we met every 2 months, because startups change so quickly. It's
Right.
not like the quarterly board meeting. It's like the every 2-month board meeting. And because you're tracking cash so close,
Right.
and your next fundraising round and all that. The other thing that made it feel really real is when, Pepsi calls you and it's like, hey, the site's down, what's going on? And you're like,
I don't know.
I don't know. Let me call someone, so it gets real when these huge brands call you with a problem, and yeah, you're expected to deliver. Absolutely. I mean, they are paying you for a service. And luckily we never had like any huge, knock on wood, any huge like tech failures. But
Right.
I mean, you can go on LinkedIn on days and there's a bug in it. You have to like refresh a couple
Sure.
times before things happen. So stuff like that happens. But oh my gosh, when a Fortune 500 company calls you and tells you about your bug, whew, you start to sweat a little.
It's tough. So now you're kind of progressing along. Let's talk about one more defining moment that gets you into the world you're in today.
Yeah.
You're no longer the daily person at Knowledge Hound.
I am
So
not.
this was your baby. I mean, talk
My
about
baby.
podcasts in the past and interviews and standing on stage. In many ways, you were known as the CEO of Knowledge Hound. So there's a personality, persona that kind of comes on, but you've moved on. So kind of walk us through what led to the decision to move on. Again, it's all positive, but still, what led to the decision to move
Yeah.
on?
Yeah.
And then we're going to
Yeah,
drop
yeah.
anchor a little bit on what you're doing today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll give you a little bit of context too, of like, so I think as a founder, as for people who are listening to this and who aren't founders, sometimes it's hard to understand the how much you do feel like it is your baby. But to give you an example, it was pretty early in, or 3 or 4 years into Knowledge Hound, and it was around Christmas, and I found out one of our competitors had just raised 30 million, and I had a panic attack, breakdown. I called my best friend, and I was just sobbing, and I'm like, these years and all this work I put in, we're gonna get crushed or whatever. And she was like, Kristi, the company is not called Kristi Hound. It is called Knowledge Hound.
I love that.
This does not define you. You have already been successful. You are successful. You will continue to be successful. But that's how wrapped up emotionally we are in our businesses. And that moment, that was a defining moment for me.
That's a great friend.
Oh, she's amazing. I mean,
yeah.
Carrie Dooley Stevens is like the best of friends ever, but she's, she continues to speak wisdom into me like that. That was a huge defining moment for me, but that's how wrapped up we get emotionally. So about a year ago, I had, 2019 business was great. Then 3 months into 2020, this thing called COVID hit. I'm not really sure if you know what that is.
I heard something about it. I read about it. Yeah.
So that impacted us, that was, it was an extremely stressful year. We got the company through COVID, and I was exhausted. And the company I really wanted the company to be growing instead of like 20, 40% a year. I really wanted this company to be growing like 300%. And in order to do that, we really needed capital. And so I wanted a different growth strategy for the business than the rest of the board did. And the rest of the board, they're investors. So they have they have a different point of view. They have one that is very experienced and rooted in pattern recognition of growing other companies. And we were on different pages on strategies for the business. I was exhausted from coming through COVID. And after talking to many, many mentors, and my husband and my parents and everyone, I came to the conclusion that it was time for me to leave, and go start something new. Like it was no longer a healthy relationship with this baby that was mine and still is. And so, I decided to leave. The board was like, how about you just take 3 months off this summer? You're probably exhausted from COVID. I really appreciated that offer. But they were right. I was exhausted from COVID, but I was like, you know what? I can still add to this company, but I don't need to run it day to day. We had an excellent, and we still do now have an excellent executive team. So we put our chief revenue officer in as CEO, who's running it. And now I'm doing something different.
Right. So you're still a board member.
Yes.
Okay. Still actively involved, but it allows, especially people that are the startup community, to say, gosh, you mean, so I can actually leave and do something else without having to exit. So that's really, really cool. But walk us through what you're doing now, because you're an idea person. Did you go back to your journal and look for ideas? You did. Oh, that's so good, Chris. You went back. Okay. And in your magical journal of 1,000 ideas. What are you doing today?
So it wasn't 1,000, I had 9 ideas. I literally had 9 ideas that I was like, okay, I want to I love all these ideas, so I started vetting them and talking through them with mentors and whoever would listen. And I started to hone in on a space in the fertility area, something that I had personal experience in. I had problems getting pregnant with my first child. And so I really wanted to fix that system and drive some price transparency into that market. Created wireframes for an app in that realm. Started testing it. Probably did about 30 qualitative interviews with folks. Realized that there wasn't like a product market fit. Pivoted it to something much broader, to be, how do you drive price transparency in any kind of medical procedure?
Okay.
And about a month ago, I killed that idea, which is probably news to you, Rick, but
That
I
is
killed
news
that
to me.
idea.
Kristi, what are you doing?
And now I'm on a totally different idea. So now I'm in the third rounds of wireframes of an app I'm really excited about. I've done several qualitative and I'm getting super great feedback, but essentially it's a time capsule of sorts of for ways to people to capture memories and moments that they don't necessarily want to share on social media. They want to, it's more private to them.
Okay.
So anyway, but that's, yeah. I mean, it's taken me over a year to kind of get to maybe what's going to be my next thing. And I don't even know, I may kill this one in 6 weeks from now. I don't know.
Listen, I love the fact that you kept the journal. You've got these ideas. And then what's interesting too, the thing about your career, you've had a decade or so of being the researcher and you're back in that same mode again. So that's so encouraging to say, hey, research still matters. People, consumers, the end users are going to tell you what problem you need to solve. And you've learned pretty quickly, it's okay to kill something. It's not that it was a bad idea. There's just no product market fit today. And that's okay. Tremendous life learning. So listen, what I want is, because you'll change the idea again in about a month. In a couple of years, when you finally have launched and you're moving along, I'm going to have you back. And we're going to see what that idea is, Kristi. And we're going to learn from that and see what the serial entrepreneur has in next. So I can't wait to hear that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to telling you what it is. Hopefully it'll be a wild success. Who knows? I mean, it's the entrepreneurial journey, so you just don't know what's ahead. Oh,
that's so good. Well, listen, Kristi, it's been a pleasure to have you on today. I can't wait until we talk next time.
Likewise. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to Push Go, a podcast highlighting the defining moments that impact how we live and work. It was fantastic having Kristi on the show today. If you like what you heard, you can find more stories just like this on listen.plumshop.com. And hey, we wouldn't mind and be mad if you left us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. New episodes drop every Wednesday, and if you're watching on YouTube, feel free to like and subscribe. Now, we've got a quick PS, that weekly segment where I give you a brief update on something happening at Plum. Today, I want to put the spotlight on Digital Demo. The Digital Demo product includes verified purchases, product experience insights, and true user-generated content. To put it simply, you'll get everyday shoppers trying your product and sharing about it organically on social media. Digital Demo is powered by Field Agent, and it's exclusively offered on plumshop.com. Check it out and make sure you use the code PUSHGO. That's PUSHGO at checkout, and you get $100 off any project.